Back to the Constitution series, sponsored by MyStraightTalk.com. In this installment, we're going to take a look at the contributing factors that led up to the American Revolution, and hopefully I'm going to reveal to you some things you had never understood before, and it will spark questions in you. I love questions. I love to receive questions that I can't even answer, and I'll have to tell you I don't know the answer, but I will find out the answer for you. I absolutely love that. By 1732, the American colonies consisted of now 13 British Crown colonies. Georgia was the last one to be established in 1732. Also, the population of the continent in North America on the eastern seaboard was just about 655,000 people. Then, in 1756, the French, who were in the middle part of the North American continent, decided they wanted to expand, and as a part of the 7 Years' War, waged war against the British and the American colonists in what we in America refer to as the French and Indian Wars. This was just the North American extension of the 7 Years' War taking place in Europe and other places throughout the world between France and Britain. By 1763, the war ended, but it left Britain with a huge problem. That was called debt. They had a large debt. And they saw the Parliament, that is, Parliament and the King, saw these 655, almost 700,000 people in America in the British Crown colonies as a source of revenue to pay off the debt for the French and Indian War. It was their contention, Parliament and the King, that since there was a very large debt incurred in defending the colonies, then the colonists should pay for their portion of that war. The problem was the British Constitution called for that no British citizen could be taxed without a representative in Parliament. And there was not one representative in Parliament from any of the 13 colonies on the American continent. Not one. In spite of this, in 1765, Parliament, and then approved by the King, issued the Stamp Act. 1765, remember that. That becomes the beginning of the American Revolution. The Stamp Act taxed every piece of paper that the colonists saw. Now, it wasn't very much by today's standard. In fact, it was almost minuscule by today's standard in taxation. But still, it was a tax. And these British citizens in the British Crown colonies in America were offended and were enraged that here they were being taxed without having a voice in Parliament. That was the problem. They didn't have a problem with taxation necessarily. What they had a problem was they didn't have a voice in the government of Britain. They didn't have anyone to stand up and voice their concerns to the British government. Well, that was the beginning of the problem. Britain eventually repealed the Stamp Act because of the great hatred of it in America. But then in 1773, they passed the infamous Tea Act. Yes, the Tea Act, the one that taxed tea. God forbid that British people should be taxed for tea. And guess what? The colonists were in an uproar. I know you've all heard of the Boston Tea Party, but most of you probably have never heard of the Charleston Tea Party. Yes, there was another tea party similar to that in Boston in Charleston, South Carolina. Then it was known as Charlestown and not Charleston. But there was a tea party in Charlestown as well. And the colonists were enraged. They began petitioning the king. They began sending representatives to the king. You may have heard of the most famous of these representatives sent to Parliament, Benjamin Franklin. But guess what? Parliament refused to listen. More importantly, and not necessarily was it the Parliament that refused to listen, as it was Lord North, the leader of Parliament, or what we would call the Prime Minister today, and the King. They would not give Mr. Franklin and the other representatives from the other colonies any voice. Not at all. And the colonists felt as British citizens, they had the right and they had the responsibility to petition Parliament for redress against their grievances. Parliament refused to listen. And the more they protested, the more they petitioned, the more firm and the more autocratic Parliament and the King became against them. He began doing all the things that were forbidden by the British Bill of Rights of 1689 that we spoke of yesterday, or in the previous installment. And guess what? That really, really fanned the fires of revolution. But you know, it's very important. We have to consider one very important thing. The revolution began with the Stamp Act in 1765. The revolution then turned into an armed conflict. How many people know the answer to this? When did the American Revolution become an armed conflict? Okay, since we can't talk back on this stage or in this particular medium of communication, the armed conflict began on April 19th, 1775. Yes, at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, it's very important to note that. And I want you to remember those dates, 1765, 1775, because by 1775, the British cash cow of the American colonies for taxation was huge. The population had nearly quadrupled. In 1775, the population of the colonies in America was nearly or just over 2.5 million people. That can equate to a lot of taxing, especially on tea or other items coming to America from Britain to help support these crown colonies of Britain. When did the American Revolution become a war of independence? So the American Revolution began in April of 1775. We had the battles of Bunker Hill in 1775. We had a number of battles in 1775 and the beginning of 1776, but it still wasn't a battle or a war for independence. No. The American Revolution began as simply a means of the British citizens demanding that Parliament and the King recognize them as British citizens and give them their rights as British citizens, a voice in Parliament. That the Parliament and the King would recognize them as British citizens and extend to them the rights guaranteed and granted to them by the British Constitution. This is very important. In our next installment tomorrow, or whenever I get it recorded and edited, we're going to talk about when the American Revolution became a war of independence and why. It's very important, especially in 21st century America, that we understand the real catalyst that drove independence. Most people are unaware of why the step was taken to independence. We'll look at that tomorrow. It's very crucial to our understanding of both independence and the Constitution. Again, I thank you for taking the time to view my videos. You can contact me at david@mystraighttalk.com. The address is there on the bottom of your screen. You can also go to mystraighttalk.com. It is fully searchable and find out more information regarding the Constitution at any one time. Thank you. Have a great day, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.